This is Gardening in America, and I'm Ed Hume. Today we're in Tacoma, Washington at the Point Defiance Park. They have many beautiful gardens here, but today we're featuring the Japanese garden. And what's so interesting by visiting the Japanese garden at this time of the year is that you see some of the really fascinating shapes of the trees and shrubs in the garden, plus you can enjoy the early bloom of the garden as well. What's interesting about any Japanese garden is that it tells a story. If you were to understand the Japanese landscaping, you would know whether the male or the female member of the family was the dominant member of the family. You'd know how many children there were and their approximate ages at the time the garden was built and what their interests were, fishing, hunting, camping, or whatever. Japanese gardens also feature water very often. And if you'll notice in the background, the very interesting bench. This is one, in fact, that you might want to study anytime you visit any garden. Visit the benches and, of course, also observe them and see how they are made. And maybe you can copy a similar style to use in your own garden, improving, adding your own personal touch as well. Keep in mind also when you visit the Japanese garden, the use of ground covers. For example, here the vinca minors are beautiful. There's two different shades here, in fact, the crimson colored one and the lavender blue. Also take a little bit of time and notice the individual shapes. For example, in this garden, the maples have just some outstanding characteristics. And in fact, you can see one area where they've used some braces to hold the branches up, and that's one problem that you often get into when you grow the maples. They tend to weep down and kind of lay on the ground, but this gives you an idea of how you can train them a bit. Also in that same area, you'll want to notice the contorted tree as well. That's a beautiful variety of nut tree, in fact, a contorted filbert. And throughout the garden, you'll see some of the rhododendrons coming into bloom, the early flowering varieties. And although the Japanese garden generally is not known for flowering plants, nevertheless, they always use a few. And notice the trees, the flowering cherries are particularly effective in the Japanese garden. And the shapes or the bonsais used in some of the evergreens are also outstanding, make great characteristics. So wherever you live, this would be a great time not only to visit the Japanese garden in your area, but any garden, and make notes on a few different ways in which not only plant materials are used and those that flower at this time of the year, but also notice the benches and other material in the garden as well. This is a great time of the year to give some thought to providing color on the patio or the deck. And containers are a great way to go about it. There's several different things to keep in mind though. Let's talk about the container first of all. This container can withstand any plant now twice that height. Always keep that in mind, the container plus twice in height. In other words, I could use these two plants in the background in this container and it would work out great. My greatest temptation probably would be to use a plant like this that's in bloom. This is Rhododendron Blue Boy, by the way, a very beautiful plant. But instead, I'm going to choose a rhododendron that's not yet in flower. See, heavily budded. This is the front side, and you always want to keep that in mind. That's the back side. So we'll always turn it, so that it has the front side forward. Now, in addition, we always like to use foliage color. So this is an emerald gold euonymus. And see, this is a medium texture and that's a fine texture, and we've got the leaf color as well. And then let's use a bold texture, and that would be the Viburnum davidi. So we have fine, medium, and bold texture, plus we've got some leaf color. That's really important. And then to go a step further on this, and I'll eventually plant these in so you can see the finished job, we'd add some summer color, or actually spring color. And here we have some beautiful color from the ranunculus, seedling ranunculus. And also we'd use probably a little bit of color from the Dusty Miller because the gray foliage adds such a bright color and brightens it up during the summer or spring season. Also, then the primroses would be great, and a little bit of blue of the pansies would be pretty. And in addition to that, maybe even a chrysanthemum to give us a little bit of color, and we'll intersperse that with the actual planting. So now let's put this all together so that you can see the finished job. And here are some pre-potted tulips. They'll add color to this container in just a few days. In fact, they're already budded. But now you can see I've got different foliage colors and foliage textures. This is the back side of the container, by the way. But look at here, we've used the Dusty Miller, the chrysanthemum, and of course the ranunculus. And then we've used the foliage color and the foliage texture. For example, the primrose is there, the Dusty Miller, and the pansy. And what a great combination. This is a rhododendron in the center called blue chip, which is blue in color. And right now is a great time to give some thought to planting up those spring containers. This is a good time of the year to give some attention to spring pruning. And probably two of the most misunderstood plants when it comes to pruning are junipers, like this juniper tam, or rhododendrons. So today let's concentrate on those two. This one I think is really easy to prune. This is a simple process. All you really need to do is to pull the tip like so. I pruned that branch now, and the secondary growth will develop. So I can do that, on all of these. Just simply pull the tips like so. It's a real easy process. Now, if you need to prune back further, pull up the branch like this and look for a point where there's a little branchlet off on each side and make your pruning cut. Now see, I've shortened that, but at the same time you can't tell that it's been pruned. What normally happens is people will go in and prune them like so. Now, all of those little tips will turn brown, and this plant then becomes very ugly. So it's better if you can just take the minute, once again, let me show you. Look for where it branches here and branches there, and make your pruning cut, like so. And by the way, you could also make a cutting from this tip if you want to. Now, let's take a look at the rhododendron, because that's an entirely different plant. The best time to prune rhododendrons is after they've finished flowering, but you can prune them any time as long as you have a sharp pair of pruning shears in hand. I like to let them bloom though, and then cut them back. And you can see this particular plant has been pruned in the past, and you'll notice that it's regrowing with new growth. Actually, look down here. See all the new growth coming up? Eventually we can get rid of all of these old branches on the rhododendron. But look what's happening back here with the plant. See, that foliage is really bad, and the plant has flowered out earlier. It's not in good health, so I've fertilized it, by the way, already, which is really important. But any of these branches, now that they're through flowering, well, I didn't even have to prune it, it broke off. Gives you an idea of how bad a shape it's in. So get that off, and then that'll help renew the growth below. Any dead or decayed, like this material back in here, will also take off right away. And you want to do that at any time throughout the entire year. Anytime you find a dead, decayed, or broken branch, get it off of your plants, and then the plants will renew themselves. But see, here are some other branches that are not really doing well. And if we get these branches cut back after they finish flowering, then this renewed growth from below is going to renew the whole plant. It's really going to look good. And you can do it at any time, but on both the rhododendrons and the junipers, spring and after the rhododendrons bloom is a good time to prune them. Right now is a good time to plant out your perennial vegetables. And perennial means that they'll come back year after year. So you're going to enjoy a harvest from them for many years to come. The asparagus is a great vegetable. These are 2-year-old starts, and usually they do not bear until the 3rd year. But if you get some spears the 1st year, I'd go ahead and cut them. And of course the rhubarb is a great perennial vegetable. This is one that you want to set off to the side of the garden. In fact, I'm not going to plant it here because it gets so large. In fact, you may even want to put it in a container if you have limited area. Now, you'll notice that I have garlic here. It's too late to plant garlic. Remember, we plant garlic when we plant out the tulips and the daffodils and all the spring flowering bulbs, but we plant them in the fall. So now's not a good time to plant them. This, of course, is another great perennial vegetable that sometimes we don't even think about, the regular globe-type onions. And the onion sets, of course, in most gardens will remain all winter long and do become a perennial. Then in addition to them, of course, are the shallots. Shallots, of course, in the onion family also, an excellent perennial vegetable to put into the garden. Now, last but not least, the horseradish. One thing to remember about horseradish is it can become a terrible nuisance. So I would, by all means, if you're going to plant it in a container or plant it somewhere where you can confine the root system, because otherwise it just really takes over. Now, let's just take a minute and plant out the asparagus, because I think that's probably the most misunderstood of all the perennial vegetables. In fact, the directions here say prepare a hole about 12 inches deep and 12 inches wide. That's too deep for asparagus. We want to plant the asparagus much shallower than that. So, here we go. Here's the root system. Ooh, this has got some leggy growth on it, which really isn't all that desirable, but that's okay. Let's take that one. You'll notice the new growth on top here is what we'll do is I'll first of all put some fertilizer here in the hole and just mix it in a little bit. And then I'll take that root system and spread it out about 2 inches below the ground. See, that's where the mistake is made on this. Very often it's recommended that you plant them 10 or 12 inches deep, but you don't want them that deep at all. You want them very, very shallow. So let me do another one. Here's the root system. Primarily hangs down, doesn't it? We'll just put it down 2 inches below the ground and pull the soil in over the top of it. Very quickly I'll do, oops, this one's a little bit rotted in the growth. So let's just spread those roots like so, and about 2 inches below ground level. It's that easy, and now's a great time to plant those perennial vegetables. Do you have a condition like this in your tree? These are what are called water sprouts. And as what happened to this tree, we had a very heavy ice storm, and this branch needed to be cut off. And all this surge of energy comes up in the spring, and no place to go. It goes into these water sprouts, which sometimes are 10 to 15 feet long, and they just ruin the shape of the tree. So the best thing for you to do is to eliminate them. And I want you to see that from below, and this is normally what happens, you're usually not up on a ladder like I am now. You cut them from below. And look what happened here when I did that. That left a stub that long. Now is what happens next year, instead of having one water sprout, this is going to have at least 3. And you do that 2 or 3 years in a row, and you're going to all of a sudden from that one point have 50 water sprouts instead of 1. So it's very, very important that we go in and actually remove that water sprout from the point at which it originates. And since I'm up here, I'm going to use just a regular pair of pruning shears. See, get it down right to bare nubbins, so there's no chance of it re-sprouting. That's the critical thing. Now here, notice already from this one point, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 water sprouts. Okay, so in this case, I'm instead going to take a saw and actually go in and saw this off. Get rid of it completely. That's essential, again, that you get it back to the point where it originates. Or instead of 6 year, we're going to have probably 24, maybe even 50. So we just take this off all the way back to the point at which it originates. And that's what you really have to keep in mind with these water sprouts. And you'll notice down the way here that there's some little tiny ones coming. God, boy, get those off too, or you're going to be in real trouble. And it just will absolutely ruin the shape of the tree if they're left for any length of time. But it's that little stub that really becomes a problem. And that's why it's so important that you get it off completely. Now on large ones like this, since I'm up in the tree, is what I'll do is to go in. There's two of them here actually. This one I can get with my hand shears. But this one I'll actually go in again and remove it with this pair of lopping shears from the actual point at which it originates. And even then, see what's happened? There's a little bit of a stub, and we'll need to check that really closely next year to see if any new buds have developed. And if that's the case, then we have to go in with a saw and actually remove it. So take out a little bit of time, and it doesn't matter what month of the year it is. As soon as you see them appear, get the water sprouts out of the tree. For those of you that love to create your own summer hanging baskets or containers with basket stuffers or super stuffers, and these are great plants to incorporate with the summer flowering geraniums and fuchsias and begonias, you'll find these basket stuffers ideal plants to use. For example, one of the really nice plants is this beautiful bacopa. The white dainty flowers appear on the plant all summer, and it grows in either sun or shade. Bacopa, a great hanging basket plant. Another interesting plant is the bidens, or bidens as some people call it, with its beautiful lacy foliage. This plant has yellow flowers all summer long and flowers late into the season. Very dainty daisy-like flowers. And another interesting plant is this one, the brachycomb. Swan River Daisy is the plant. This blooms all summer long as well, and there are varieties that have pink, blue, mauve, and then of course the new yellow flowering variety as well. And another interesting plant is this one, Centradina. Look at the beautiful foliage on this. In addition, it has violet rose flowers almost all summer long. Centradina is really a nice plant for that purpose. And the foliage, bronze foliage, is pretty too. And another interesting plant is this one, the Tasmanian violet. Just beginning to bloom, but it'll bloom all season long and trails beautifully. Does especially well in semi-shade. Look at here, you can see all the other basket stuffers and super stuffers that you can use in hanging baskets as well as, of course, containers for summer color, and incorporate them with the petunias and the geraniums and the other summer flowering plants. And all of these plants are available at your local nursery and garden center. Today we're in Florida at Walt Disney World Resort at Epcot, and I'm with Dave Forehand, the horticulturist. Dave, what part are we in here?
Well, this is part of the agricultural display here in Epcot in the Future World area, and this is called the Land Pavilion. We're showcasing agricultural technologies and techniques within the auspices of the greenhouse here.
What basically is happening with these units that are passing us?
Well, right behind us we have our, what we refer to as our aeroponics system. It's a variation of simple hydroponics. Instead of the roots being immersed in water, we pulse or spray water with nutrients on the roots of the plants. And that's what we see with the conveyors moving behind us. It's the plants that are part of that system.
Now, what's the goal of all this area?
Well, the land in general is here to highlight advances in technology and the success in agriculture, not only in greenhouse production of crops, but also in field production around the world. We have different biomes that showcase different parts of the world, like the tropics, temperate zones, and we highlight the things that are going on in those areas of the world.
Do you have any partnerships here with this project?
We do. We work with other groups. For instance, we have a working relationship with NASA, the Plant Science Group, or the Life Sciences Group over at Kennedy Space Center. looking at ways to grow plants in space, and we highlight some of those systems as they put them together over there. And we've had that relationship for quite a few years here.
Now, why would NASA be interested in growing plants in space?
Well, if we're going to ever have a space station, we're going to have to grow some food there. And so to do that, you've got to have some way to grow that. And they feel like some type of hydroponic technique is probably going to be the best way to grow plants in space.
Sure. What are the applications now throughout this? How would this be used in commerce?
Well, what we're showcasing here is just plant production. Herbs, smaller vegetables are growing. Other greenhouses, we have larger vegetable crops, and we're just showcasing techniques that are used in greenhouse production. Parts of the world, it's very popular to grow crops in greenhouses.
Are there any challenges here?
Well, our biggest challenge, honestly, are insects. Here in Florida, we're blessed with many, many insects, and to control those takes a lot of effort and a lot of science, actually.
Oh, I'll bet. What are the growing mediums you're using here?
Well, we are always experimenting with new ones. We've used rock wool, which is a volcanic type material. Looks a lot like a big sponge, perlite, and we're looking at a new one called coconut core. It's made from coconut fiber. It's actually organically based, but it's from the waste industry of the coconut industry over in Asia, and we're looking at using that as a substitute for peat moss, for instance.
Dave, what do you do with all these crops?
Well, once we harvest them, they go to the restaurants here at Epcot. The chefs here produce really nice food products out of the fresh herbs and all the vegetables that we're able to harvest. So we're not just growing these for showcase, we're actually using them here in Epcot as well.
Thanks, Dave. That's all the time we have today. Hope you can join me at the same time next time for Gardening in America. And remember, our relationship with the planet today is tomorrow's future. Have a great week.